And good evening, everyone. And welcome once again to Bhagavad-gita Virtual Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana. Welcome. Thank you very, very much for joining us. For joining me, because you, technically speaking, are us, or you, because you're not me and I'm not you. At least, I hope that's what you think, since I have emphasized this idea thus far in our satsang. In any event, just to recap, last week, He-Man versus Sparkle Pony. We talked about the ethics of warfare and our expectations from a supreme being, and how the supreme being is not obliged to operate in accordance with our expectations or our standards of what we think might be the right thing to do. We spoke about just war theory and the idea that sacrifice in the course of doing one's duty may very well be rewarded, given that death is not the end in Bhagavad-gita. We covered verses 31 and 30 through 38 of the second chapter. Tonight, an introduction to karma yoga. In this section, Krishna begins to speak about the relationship of the knowledge that he has shared with Arjuna in the previous verses with action. How do you practically apply this understanding of the distinction between spirit and matter? Keeping our eyes on the prize, we'll speak about how we are encouraged to remain focused, to keep our attention fixed on the ultimate goal, and how easily our attention can be diverted from that goal. We'll also speak a little bit about what the Vedas are, as Krishna will introduce the topic, reflecting back on Arjuna's reasons for not wanting to fight, which are based in principles of Vedic culture. So we'll speak about the Vedas, what they are. That'll be an informational portion of our program tonight. We will cover verses 39 through 46 in the second chapter. Here is a question for you. I've got a poll, and here it is. Question number one is, do you think having theoretical knowledge about your true nature would change the way you act? And then the second question, do you think having experiential knowledge about your true nature would change the way you act? Please go ahead and answer these questions. All right. Thank you all very much for playing. All right. I am looking forward to circling back to this question. I think we got, I believe everyone has answered. You need, some people might need more options. Well, granted, there is some gray area. Things are not always so black and white. You know, maybe it would change. Maybe, you know, what is it that changes in me, that motivates me to change? So hopefully we'll get some additional clarity on this. Let me just make sure everyone has taken our poll. 11, okay, very good. I'm ending the poll. We have our results. Thank you very much. And I'm going to just put that away for later. All right. Let's begin now with a quote about the nature of the relationship of knowledge and action. This is a wonderful quote I found about this. Knowledge knocks on the door of action. If it receives a reply, it stays. Otherwise, it departs. When I found this quote, I was reminded of some classes and conversations that I had with Damodar Swami, who joined us a couple of weeks ago on this satsang. And he spoke about how you have to nurture realizations, about how you have to hang out with them. And not just say, wow, that was cool, and let it go. But rather, you have to hang out with your realizations so that they'll continue to hang out with you. And then you have to apply them. So in this portion of the Bhagavad-gita, we begin to look into this relationship of knowledge to action. And as this quote implies, action has to be taken on the basis of knowledge. Otherwise, the knowledge itself will skip town and we'll wonder where that knowledge went. All right. So, the verses that we will cover this evening, 39 through 46, as has been our habit, tradition, standard operating procedure in the past. I am going to read through the verses, and then we are going to go back through the verses in some detail. Hold on just a second, and let me just make a technical adjustment. Okay, here we go. So, verse 239. Thus far, I have described how to see with discernment. Now, hear me as I explain how this same kind of intelligence can be applied to the yoga of action. O Partha, Arjuna, by acting on the basis of such intelligence, you will be free from the bondage of reactions. Verse 40. The progress of those who endeavor along the path of righteous action is never lost or minimized, and just a little advancement can save one from the greatest danger. O beloved son of the Kurus, Arjuna, those who take to this path pursue a singular goal with resolute determination, whereas the intelligence of those who are irresolute is drawn in countless directions. Verses 42 and 43, possessing a poor fund of knowledge, those who are delighted by the flowery language of the Vedas, which promise heavenly rewards and a fortuitous future in exchange for extravagant ritualistic offerings, absorb themselves in the pursuit of sensual pleasure and opulence, insisting that there is nothing more to life than this. Verse 44. The resolute determination to achieve the perfection of meditation never arises in the minds of those who are bewildered by an obsession with affluence and power and worldly pleasures. Verse 45. The Vedas are primarily concerned with the three qualities of material nature. Transcend these qualities, Arjuna. Establish yourself in pure spiritual consciousness, and thus, situated in transcendence, free yourself from anxieties arising from dualistic conceptions of loss and gain. Verse 46. For one who has complete knowledge of the highest truth, the value of the Vedas is equal to that of a small well that has been placed next to a vast reservoir of water. Before we go to the verse that we will chant together tonight, does anyone have any questions about this section, just the verses themselves? Feel free to type your question into the question field, and as I anxiously wait for any question you may have, I will once again share the screen so that the verse that we will chant together this evening should now be on your screen. This is verse 44, and I'll repeat the translation right after we chant, as is our usual routine. I will chant first and give you time to chant it back. Just a quick review for those of you who have not chanted with us. The accent mark over the S in the first word indicates an SH sound, but an SH sound in the back of one's mouth. So instead of sh as in she, it's more like sh as in a lower pitched white noise. The bar across the A means a long A, which in Sanskrit means that the A is more open and held long for twice as long. The dot at the end of the M, at the end of the first line, indicates closing one's lips and closing the back of one's mouth as well. The dot under the R in the first word of the second verse is a ri sound, so not a sound, but flicking your tongue off the roof of your mouth, ra. The dot under the H at the end of the third line indicates that the vowel before the H will echo back, and that's only the case when the dot under the H is at the end of a word that's at the end of a line. And I think that covers all of our diacritical pronunciation cues. So here we go. Bhogaishvarya prasakthanam Ayapahrita chetasam Yavasayatnika buddhihi samadhana vidhiyate. Very good. I can't hear you, but I'm sure it was very good. Okay, here's our translation once again. The resolute determination to achieve the perfection of meditation never arises in the minds of those who are bewildered by an obsession with affluence, power, and worldly pleasures. So we'll come back to this as we work through each of the verses in turn. So knowledge and action. Coming back to our first verse. Here in this section, in this cluster of verses, Krishna is pivoting from Sankhya philosophy, the discernment between spirit and matter, to karma yoga, the yoga of action, or action informed by knowledge. The ultimate goal of yoga is spiritual awakening, and therefore the ultimate goal of karma yoga is also spiritual awakening. Karma yoga is used in modern yoga parlance to mean that you may take a yoga class, and the money that you pay for the yoga class goes to a good cause, a worthy cause, a charitable organization, as opposed to the yoga studio or the yoga teacher or what have you. And that would be good karma. Technically, however, that wouldn't be karma yoga. And the reason is because, however wonderful a charitable cause may be, if the charitable cause itself does not have a component of spiritual awakening as its intention, if that's not built in, then we're not really doing yoga yet. We're doing good works. We're doing good karma, action that is meant to relieve suffering or for the benefit of others, something that is selflessly performed. There's nothing really in it for you, it's really for someone else or some higher cause. But that higher cause may still be a material cause rather than a spiritual cause. So in order for for action to rise to the level of yoga, this intention of spiritual awakening must be there as a component of one form or another. That doesn't mean that karma yoga has no practical application for problems in the material world. On the contrary, the best solutions for material problems are spiritual solutions, because spiritual solutions actually get to the root cause of any material problem. Whatever problem we have ultimately is rooted in illusion or ignorance. So when our actions rise to the level of yoga, which is to say when our action is informed by spiritual knowledge and therefore imbued with a spiritual intention, intermingled with whatever apparently material activity we are engaged in, then not only can we work in a practical way to solve problems that we face in the world, but we get a little closer to the root cause of the problem and actually solving that root cause of the problem itself. Okay, so here's my next question for you. How does knowledge of the true nature of the self solve your problems? Take a moment to think about this, which reflects back on our poll. Let us just say that you now have theoretical knowledge of the true nature of yourself. Is this helpful information? Does this matter for you? Think about it now. If you have something to share now, of course, that would be great. Here's a writing assignment. Write down what you think it means to be self-realized. Your understanding, your personal conception of what knowledge of the true nature of the self really means. Then, write down a problem that you have. Then, write down what you're doing right now to try to solve this problem. And how is it working? Then, try to think of how this knowledge of the true nature of yourself would inform your actions in such a way so that you might do something different, or you might do the same thing, but with a different intention that would change your internal experience of working through this problem. Consider that homework, voluntary, optional homework, of course, but a take-home exercise. See what you come up with. Would knowledge of your true nature change the way you act? Or would it change something more subtle about the quality of your action? Because it may not change anything about what you do, but it may change the consciousness that you do it in. All right. Something to share from one of our Jessicas. I know from experience that I only learn from experience. Theory is great, but it is only from hindsight that I can truly see the value of theory. Okay, So this validates our earlier point, and your own experience seems to validate this idea that experience is actually a better teacher than a book. And the value of book knowledge is only truly appreciated once we test it out in the field. Thank you very much. So realization is applied knowledge. This is a quote from one of my teachers when he was asked the question, what is realization? He answered it very simply, just like this. Realization is applied knowledge. You get the theory, you experiment, you perform an experiment based on the theory, you get a result, you see if the theory is valid. Thus, yoga is a scientific process. Theory, experiment, result. It's scientific. The difference, of course, from conventional science is that it's a subjective science. You're doing the experiment on yourself. And your subjective experience is the validation for yoga. It's not that someone else can be privy to your experience and therefore say objectively this is true. But they simply have to do the experiment, try it for themselves. Neela Madhava, I'm not sure. An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure? I'm not really sure how that quote comes in. If you want to elaborate on that, then perhaps I'll get a better idea of where you're going with that. But I'd have to think about that. Okay. So verse 40, the progress of those who endeavor along the path of righteous action is never lost or minimized, and just a little advancement can save one from the greatest danger. Now that's kind of a curious thing to say. First of all, the idea that advancement on this path of righteous action is never lost. It's kind of like a permanent bank account that you can always invest in to build up your balance, and there's never a withdrawal. Now, this is different from garden variety karma. In garden variety karma, you perform an action and you get a reaction, good or bad, depending on the nature of your original action. And then done, finished. So you make a deposit and then a withdrawal is automatically made by the law of karma. You invest in your destiny, and then your investment either gives you a negative return in the form of bad karma or a positive return in the form of good karma, but then that's it. Your balance is back to zero. But here we have this idea, or this proposition, that karma yoga is action that goes into a categorically different kind of account for two reasons. One, there's no withdrawal, therefore it's always building up. And secondly, since there's no withdrawal, there's no reaction at all. And that's the kind of mystical thing about karma yoga. Now, how that is action without a reaction, which seems to defy the laws of physics, we'll get into that a little bit later. Meanwhile, we have this other part of the proposition. The greatest danger, it will save you from the greatest danger. What is the greatest danger? The greatest danger that Krishna refers to is to fall back down, not just into the cycle of birth and death, but into species of life where the opportunity for further advancement along the path of yoga is not available, where consciousness is covered over to such a degree that self-inquiry cannot happen. When we take birth in an animal life form, fish life form, some other life form other than human, then our actions also do not generate a karmic reaction. We're simply going to play out the karmic reaction that brought us into this hierarchically lower status of life or life form. And in blind obedience to the laws of material nature, we will do what we do, and gradually, by that same law, we will float back up through the various species of life until we get a human birth again, and then once again, we have a life of responsibility where karma kicks back in and we get actions, reactions to our actions. So this idea that we can act in such a way that does not bring about a reaction saves us from a reaction that will bring us into a lower status of birth in terms of life forms. And in the Bhagavad-gita, it's understood that life forms are hierarchical based on how heavily consciousness is covered by the qualities of material nature. We'll talk a little bit more about material nature and these qualities in just a minute. '41. Resolute determination, keeping our eyes on the prize. Here's the verse again. O beloved son of the Kurus, Arjuna, those who take to this path pursue a singular goal with resolute determination, whereas the intelligence of those who are irresolute is drawn in countless directions. Our consciousness is drawn in countless directions in modern life. I was looking for images that could illustrate this, and I did a Google search on multitasking. And I found a lot of images about that, had people manifesting 8-armed forms, doing so many things. And they were smiling and looking happy and successful. They were super people, super moms. There's a lot of super mom multitasking photos or illustrations. And I just thought, wow, that's awful. The idea that we glorify multitasking and we glorify people who can send their attention in so many directions all at the same time. The key to success in almost anything is single-minded attention. Super intense concentration on one thing. So here we have two different ways of being. One way where our attention is scattered all over the place with everything that comes our way or everything that comes anywhere close to us, or we get so habituated to going out and seeking things. We have to find out what happened out there in the world, what's been posted on Facebook, what happened in the news, in our 15-minute news cycle, who posted something on Instagram, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The world that we live in is designed to take our attention and draw it out into countless directions, even within the small bubble that social media puts us in the course of finding out all about us and only showing us the things that it thinks we want to see. But still, within that realm, there's so many things popping up Whereas the yogi, someone who is on the path of karma yoga, can play in traffic and still be single-pointed in their determination to make everything they do work within a greater strategy of spiritual awakening. Okay. The next two verses together, which I'll read again, now introduce the idea or introduce the Vedas. So once again, possessing a poor fund of knowledge, those who are delighted by the flowery language of the Vedas, which promise heavenly rewards and a fortuitous future in exchange for extravagant ritualistic offerings, absorb themselves in the pursuit of sensual pleasure and opulence, insisting that there is nothing more to life than this. I have very nice relatives, and they want the best for me. And when I speak to them, they ask how I'm doing and what I'm doing. What I'm doing, of course, is secondary to how I'm doing. Hold on for just a moment, please. All they really want to know is that I'm healthy and I have a roof over my head and I'm making money. Because they are pretty much absorbed in the idea that that counts as success. And, you know, I appreciate that they want the best for me. They want my welfare. Bhagavad-gita is not encouraging us to engage in these kinds of temporary material benefits. And the Vedas are basically a handbook for how to get the best out of the material world. It's a handbook for good karma, not freedom from karma, but good karma. Hold that thought for just a moment. Okay. Now, the Vedas themselves are the oldest books on planet Earth. By which I mean an actual book as opposed to hieroglyphics on a wall or cave paintings or something like that. And it is understood within the Vedic tradition that they were written down at the dawn of Kali Yuga, 5,000 years ago, this iron age of quarrel and hypocrisy. Scholars, of course, will thumb wrestle about dates and which Veda was written first and such like that. The Vedas are divided into 4 sections, and the Rig Veda is generally considered to be the oldest of the Vedas. 1,028 hymns in praise of various deities. Indra, who's in charge of the weather. Agni, who's in charge of fire, heat. Vishnu, who is the maintainer of everything. Rudra, another name for Shiva. Varuna, the god of the waters, etc., etc. And the idea here is that by praising the demigods, one will get material benedictions because the demigods are in charge of material nature and the workings of material nature. They control material nature. So if you want material nature to cooperate with you, then you give an offering of some kind that to the demigods to honor them, and they in exchange will send fair weather your way. The Yajur Veda is a handbook for just such ritualistic sacrifices, so that a priest will know exactly how to conduct a sacrifice in order to inspire or induce the demigods to reciprocate in this way or that. The Samaveda are chants, melodies to be sung during such ritualistic sacrifices or during worships. And then the Atharva Veda, hymns and mantras and incantations that are outside the scope of these ritualistic sacrifices and extra stuff. Within each of these sections of the Vedas, you have 4 divisions. The first division is the Samhitas. These are the hymns and mantras, literally means collections, and this actually forms the Vedas proper. The next are the Brahmanas. These are prose manuals for ritual and prayer. This is the section that essentially, explains the Samhitas. The Aranyakas literally means forest books for those who go off to the forest. These are philosophical treatises for hermits and saints, so that you have some guidance when you are living a life of renunciation. And then finally, the Upanishads, books of philosophy, also called Vedanta, the end or the conclusion of the Vedas. So this is the portion that actually has the most to do with yoga, the Upanishads, the philosophical portion of the Vedas that actually point to the ultimate goal of knowledge in the Vedas. And the relationship of the Bhagavad-gita to the Vedas is that the Bhagavad-gita is also known as Gita-upanishad because it conforms to the form and philosophical conclusion of the Upanishads. Basically, the Bhagavad-gita is a condensed summary study of the knowledge of the Upanishads in a much more accessible kind of language. There are different flavors of Sanskrit, and the Sanskrit of the Bhagavad-gita is more colloquial, more accessible, not as terse. So Krishna is bringing up the Vedas to reference Arjuna's original arguments. All of Arjuna's considerations as to why he should or should not fight have to do with Vedic principles of dharma. What's the right thing to do in order to get the right karmic reaction? What's the best way to get the best outcome? Which is really what the Vedas are about. So earlier in this chapter, we recall that Krishna tells Arjuna, you are speaking learned words, you're speaking as if you were a learned person, but actually the wise do not have problems like you're having. They're not confused the way you are confused. They do not lament the way you are lamenting. Because the wise, as Krishna is defining the wise, understand the ultimate purpose of the Vedas, what the Vedas are for, where the Vedas ultimately point, the ultimate conclusion of Vedic knowledge. Throughout the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna will uphold Vedic culture, but he will dismiss ritualistic worship for material gain as missing the whole point of the Vedas. Sometimes people can get confused in this portion in particular, because it seems like Krishna is dissing the Vedas, and yet the Bhagavad-gita is considered a Vedic literature in the sense that its ultimate philosophical conclusion is in line with the ultimate conclusion of Vedanta, and it appears from within the Vedic culture itself. So it seems kind of contradictory. This is how you understand this apparent contradiction. Vedic culture is upheld, and the ultimate goal of Vedanta is also upheld. But the vast majority of the Vedas themselves are concerned with how you gain in a material sense. So religiosity in the form of Vedic rituals brings about prosperity, which then brings about sense enjoyment, which then ultimately brings about frustration, because then you have to do it all again. The prosperity has to be generated again, and then there's enjoyment, and then you run out of enjoyment, and then you have to go back, and over again, religiosity, prosperity, sense enjoyment, and finally, one might get the idea that this is never really going to make me happy. Maybe there's something beyond these things. And that's the direction that Krishna is pointing Arjuna in, and by extension, pointing us in. Beyond this cycle of religiosity, ritual, prosperity, and worldly enjoyment. Verse 244, so now this is the verse we chanted and focused on. The resolute determination to achieve perfection of meditation never arises in the minds of those who are bewildered by an obsession with affluence, power, and worldly pleasures. So here, Krishna is telling us very clearly that material consciousness is incompatible with spiritual consciousness. What we would like is that our material enjoyment goes up and our spiritual experience also goes up at the same time. And that actually doesn't work like that. What happens is, as our preoccupation with material enjoyment decreases, the capacity for spiritual enjoyment, for experiencing progress along the path of spiritual life, increases. And as we will see a little bit later in the Gita, Krishna speaks about how gradually, however much we may be attracted to material life, we can develop a taste for spiritual life that is higher, that exceeds the kind of happiness that we get from the pursuit of material life. And it is a gradual trade-off. It's not like you just drop everything in your material life and become an instant spiritualist, cent per cent. Some people can do that. I'm not one of them. Most people will transform their material lives into spiritual lives by gradually dovetailing everything in one's material life into something with a spiritual intention, and that is karma yoga. The garden of earthly delights. It's not the place we want to stay. As much as I like Hieronymus Bosch, I think his message was also the same, that staying here actually does not ultimately work out in our favor. Okay. Verse 45. The Vedas are primarily concerned with the three qualities of material nature. Transcend these three qualities, Arjuna. Establish yourself in pure spiritual consciousness, and thus, situated in transcendence, free yourself from anxieties arising from dualistic conceptions of loss and gain. So here, the idea is, once again, that you enjoy, then you don't enjoy. You're prosperous, then you're not prosperous. These things come and go. And if we're attached to gain, then it will mean we will suffer when there is loss. So the three qualities of material nature. Goodness, the first one, also known as sattva in Sanskrit, pure illuminating, characterized by knowledge, clarity of thought, and detachment from material life. It results in knowledge, the elevation of consciousness, and happiness. sustainable happiness. The mode of passion provides us with temporary pleasure, but not sustainable happiness. It's born of hankering and characterized by a distortion of intelligence, intense endeavor and attachment to the results of that endeavor. And the result for us, we develop greed, we experience anxiety, misery, and stalled spiritual progress. The last, the quality of ignorance, is born of delusion, characterized by insanity, apathy, sleep. It results in illusion, foolishness, violence towards others, and the degradation of consciousness. We are all affected by all three of these modes of nature at different times. And we actually need all three, because if we didn't have the mode of ignorance, then we'd never get to sleep, and we need to get to sleep. We actually need to sleep just to be healthy. If we didn't have the mode of passion, we'd never get anything done. We need to do things. Karma yoga means action yoga. And so you need some kind of passion in order to act and then transform that action into yoga. And then goodness, you need the mode of goodness, because otherwise you'd never be able to maintain anything. So all three of them play a role. However, the idea is that we elevate through these modes from ignorance through passion up to goodness, so that even when we sleep in the mode of goodness. You know, for example, if we're sleeping in a space that's very clean, has fresh air, very dark at night, so we get a good night's sleep, that would be ignorance sleeping in the mode of goodness. Whereas if we're sleeping in a space that's really very, very cluttered and in disarray, the air is very stale, then that would be, you know, in the mode of ignorance. And if it's very noisy in the environment that we're sleeping through, I mean, you can learn how to sleep through that. I know, I used to live in New York City. I can sleep through noise. But that would be sleep or ignorance in the mode of passion and ignorance. The last verse. For one who has complete knowledge of the highest truth, the value of the Vedas is equal to that of a small well that's placed next to a vast reservoir of water. That looks like a really nice place. I'd like to go there right now. And there certainly wouldn't be much point of digging a well right near there. So if you know the actual point, the end goal of the Vedas, then you have essentially this vast reservoir of water. And the ritualistic ceremonies meant to give you temporary material enjoyments is kind of like that small well. So that's the point Krishna is making here. Okay, so there you have it. Tonight's program, our introduction to Karma Yoga, which we will be staying with for a little while in this portion of the Bhagavad-gita. We've talked about the relationship of knowledge to action, how knowledge informs action, and action performed with transcendental knowledge behind it becomes Karma Yoga. We've talked about the necessity of single-pointed attention as we imbue every action with the same singular intention of spiritual awakening. And we got a little information, some background information of what the Vedas are and the relationship of the Vedas to the Bhagavad-gita, verses 239 through 46. Here's your big chance to ask me questions. I live for your questions. And I certainly hope you have some. And if your questions come later, if there is a delayed reaction, then as always, you can send me your questions at hari@hari-kirtana.com. So, what you got? All right. We have, I see a hand raised. So maybe there's a question coming. Okay. Question is good karma binding as well? Good question. Yes. Receiving the results or of positive action is not optional. You are obliged to receive the benefit of your righteous activity. So if you do a good thing, you do a good deed, well, that's good, but you now have an obligation to stick around and experience the reaction to your good deed. And you might think, well, that's not so bad. But as long as we're here and engaged in the material world, in material consciousness, well, then we have every opportunity to do something that generates a negative. So now, oh, good, follow-up question. So then so then we should not do anything? No, because inaction is also an action. Inaction is a choice. If you choose not to act, then your disengagement is a kind of action. This is what Arjuna wants to do. He wants to disengage from the battle. And Krishna is telling him, no, you will actually get a bad karmic reaction if you disengage from the battle. So to be inactive is also an active choice. And it allows things to happen that otherwise might not have happened if you had taken an active role, if you had participated. The other thing is, it's almost impossible for one not to act at all. Very few people can completely disengage from the world, go live in a cave, die in a cave, be satisfied that no one knew they ever existed. We are obliged to act according to our nature. So even if we try not to act, odds are our nature will force us to act, as Krishna has also said. For further information about inaction as action, consult Rush. Okay, the homework question. The homework question was, Neela Madhava asked for that to be repeated. Write down your idea of what it means to be self-realized. Then, write down a problem that you have in your life. Then, write down how you're currently going about solving that problem. Then, consider how knowledge, theoretical and or experiential knowledge of the true nature of yourself would change either what you do, how you do it, or the ultimate intention of doing exactly what you're doing. In other words, would it change quantitatively or qualitatively? Or both? But what would the impact of understanding your true nature be on how you approach solving any particular problem in your life? This is for you. I don't need to know about your problems. I got my own problems. So you don't need to send this to me, and I'm not going to grade it. This is your personal stuff for you to work on. Okay. Any other questions? Anything else that I can talk to you about this evening in the couple of minutes we have left? While you're thinking about any other questions you may have, please allow me to remind you that for those of you anywhere within 500 miles of Richmond, Virginia, I will be in Richmond, Virginia this Saturday, April 28th, from 12:30 to 6:30 for a talk on ancient wisdom for modern life. Please join me if you are, well, closer than 500 miles, I guess. I should be reasonable about this. Also, if you are in the area around Silver Spring, Maryland, or would like to fly from out of town into the Silver Spring International Airport every so often, my Advanced Studies program, 300-hour yoga teacher training program with Ashley Lateki-Ellenboss at Skyhouse Yoga will begin on this September. And if you would like more information about it, I would be happy to share it with you. All right, next week, Introduction to Karma Yoga continued. We'll speak about action without attachment in a little bit greater detail. And what does it mean to be liberated, which is beyond that three-part cycle of religiosity and prosperity and worldly enjoyment. When you get tired of that, you might think, how do I skip out on this whole cycle of trying to enjoy life in the material world? Where's the exit? Where's the door? How can I get out of here? We'll cover verses 47 through 53. And that's all, folks. Please remember, I'm very anxious to hear any comments or questions that you may have. All right, I hope you have a wonderful, Neela, thank you very much. And to all of you, thank you very much for joining me. And I look forward to seeing you all next time. Have a very, very nice night.